So I am Patti Garrison. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I live in Lewis, Delaware. I am an Episcopalian. My relationship to the LGBTQ community is my non-binary 26-year-old child. I always knew pretty much from the age of, say, 3, that this was a child who was gender expansive, who did not conform to the typical, very rigid gender confines. So what that looked like was they hated dresses. They didn't want to wear dresses. The stereotypical kind of things that kind of align with the stereotypes around girls. They were not interested in that at all, and made their feelings known even when they were tiny. But I also knew that with my child, it wasn't there wasn't expansiveness, meaning that while I, in the back of my head, presumed they were trans, in fact, there were ways in which they also felt comfortable with things that are more gendered towards females. So that was, occasionally playing with dolls or stuffed animals, or, liking to be around girls, not necessarily wanting the rough and tumble of boys. So it really was, in fact, a non-binary life for this child. But I did know it very early on. What I learned is that there was probably more kind of tumult emotionally going on during their adolescence than might have appeared to be. As they got older, left college, and were more able to make decisions on their own as a young adult, they really did move more into what I think they typically call non-binary trans-masculine, but on their own terms, So some things have changed and some things haven't. So that's what I would say. They've come more into their own. Well, in the beginning, when they came out, I told me they identified as non-binary, they no longer wanted to be referred to as she, her, or girl, or woman. And they also took on gender-neutral pronouns. I think that initially the relationship was, I wouldn't call it strained. I actually think it became somewhat easier. They seemed less angry. They seemed happy that on the face of it, I was supportive. I came from an affirming tradition, an affirming Christian tradition. So I didn't have a lot of the theological concerns that other folks might from a more conservative tradition, but I was in deep turmoil inside. The relationship wasn't impacted by that deep turmoil because I hid it fairly well, and because we also live separate. So my kid has their own life and their own apartment and their own world in a different place. So I would say the relationship on paper looked the same, but for me, the ground was shaking under my feet. I think that what I've learned is that I needed to grow. in ways that I never thought I needed to grow. And one of those ways was I needed to open my heart to things I didn't understand. I was more wedded to understanding than I really thought. And by that, I mean, I had to have it all figured out. It had to all make sense to me. Why were they okay wearing dresses until they were, then they started wearing dresses and being more quote unquote female in adolescence? When did that shift back? Trying to make sense of this puzzle. But what I learned is that need to figure it all out was a part of me that didn't always serve me or the relationships that I have. And in some ways that didn't even support my relationship with God, that I needed to understand it all, and God needed to explain all of this to me and all of this. So I learned that I was in some ways more rigid than I had thought I was. And that was a good thing to know. Well, that was probably one of the most profound changes for me. So I, being from an affirming tradition, and also at the time I was living in a very affirming part of the country in northern New Jersey, I thought that I would not ever have an issue with faith, that was taken care of in some ways by the church I belonged to. But that wasn't the case at all. I was lost. I really was a lost soul, I felt, and in deep grief. And what I learned was that my faith was not really church at all, because some of the most beautiful support I received, and the support that I needed to focus on love above all, was from more conservative Christians. These were my people, and they were with me every step of the way, through the tears, through the laughter, through the joys, through the coming to terms. They were with me throughout. And so I've learned that my faith is really a function of love and connection and community wherever I find it, not necessarily this is the church, and so this is where my community begins and ends. Well, the first step in the journey was in around 2014. They were a sophomore in college, and they had been dating men. They had been living life as a straight woman, and so they called me, and I was at the office, and I went into a conference room, and they told me that they were gay and would no longer be dating men. And I was supportive. I was not surprised, really. Well, maybe a little, because they had been pretty much dating boys. And yet I did feel sad, surprisingly. And that surprised me because, especially where I lived, and even in my church, my pastor was gay. I had gay friends. But I still felt something of a loss. Yet I was happy that they were making moves to have a life that was theirs and that they could live. I think the bigger shift for me, and the harder part, and the part that really, forced me to kind of reckon with my kind of what I was about, was the second coming out, and that was in 2018. They had moved to Brooklyn, and they had an apartment, they had roommates, they were starting to build their life. And I found out they were they, them on their Instagram. So I looked and I saw that the pronouns had changed, and they also were changing their appearance. They were looking more masculine, and they had cut their very long hair very, very short. And I thought, something's up here. And then we saw each other. I worked in Manhattan at the time, so that we met, we had dinner together, and I asked them, I said, did you change your pronouns? And they hugged me very tight and said, yes, Mommy, I identify as non-binary now. And we talked a little bit about what that meant. So that was how I learned, on Instagram. I do. I think for me, the biggest fear now is kind of the discourse in our culture and, some of the legislation that concerns me and worries me desperately about, the pronouns and who gets to say whose gender is who and is what. And so that bothers me a lot. I appreciate that it's a difficult thing to get one's head around. And I have had this kind of thing with my own family. It's hard, especially when you're dealing with they, them pronouns. That can be a shift for people that's hard to make. But what upsets me and what does frighten me is how it all gets often reduced to kind of marginalizing people even further than they're already marginalized. Well, being a Christian to me kind of in some ways makes it easier, because I always come back to love, and I always put my child first, because at the end of the day, I think about Jesus, and I think about how he lived in some ways on the margins. He did not particularly, he took on in some ways the power structure, and instead he found folks on the margins and connected with them, and they were often the untouchables or women or people that you weren't supposed to associate with. So I just keep returning to that, and I think that gets me less caught up in everyone's opinion about whether someone should have a they, them pronoun, or someone is trans or not trans, or whatever it might be. That's how my faith supports me, and certainly the community I've built with QCF. I would say the first thing to do is to realize you're not alone, that and it's okay that you're struggling, and it's okay that you feel adrift and in pain, and whatever place you're in, whatever it is, even if it's not those things, that's okay. And God will meet you where you are, because he met me where I was. And I was crying in the bathroom of my job, on my lunch break. That's where I was. And God was with me throughout this process, and God led me to a community. And I think that's the biggest thing. If you can, to reach out to QCF or elsewhere where you can be with like-minded people. I would say that. And I would say opening your heart pretty much as far as it will go. Because regardless of your denomination, or whether you're from an affirming church or a non-affirming church or whatever it might be, it's still a journey, and it's still a process, and parents need to process. So take that time. But to also do it away from your child. This is your work. Your kid is doing their own work, or his own work, or her own work. You have to do yours.